Welcome to the Palestine Chronicles Floodgate podcast. We are here to dive deep into today's most pressing issues, cutting through the noise and cliches of mainstream media. I am your host, Ramzy Baroud, and with me is the brilliant Romana Rubeo, Italian journalist and managing editor of the Palestine Chronicle, and Robert Inlakesh, a political analyst, a journalist, documentary filmmaker, and a regular contributor to the Palestine Chronicle. Together, we will unpack the stories that matters and give you the context you've been missing. Let's get started. On our agenda today, we have several important points. We will talk about Arab reactions to the Trump's comments about ownership of Gaza and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the name of, you know, humanitarian guises and that sort of thing, and the possibility of a return to the war, in addition to the link between geopolitical changes underway globally and the situation in Palestine. Let me get started here with my first question. Just to start the conversation amongst the three of us, Romana, are the Arabs, in fact, the international community, doing enough to push back against the genocidal language which is being used by US President Donald Trump and other extremists within the Israeli but also American governments, including, of course, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself?
So let's be honest here. Nobody is doing enough because I think the seriousness of what was said, openly speaking about ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and basically speaking about a plan which would, in order for it to be implemented, would entail to go militarily into Gaza and take Palestinians out of the street with violence. Of course, we are talking about something that should spark outrage across the world. I don't feel that the outrage was proportional with the seriousness of what was said. That said, I don't even think that the Arab world is completely muted. There is a part of the media who is trying to advance the idea that, for example, during the famous press conference on February 11th, King Abdullah of Jordan was agreeing with Trump's plan. Personally, I do not think he was agreeing. Personally, I think, first of all, that he was caught completely by surprise by Trump's press conference. And second, I think he wasn't bold enough and brave enough. I don't think that boldness is his best quality of Jordanian leadership for what matters. But
I'm gonna stop you here. I'm gonna stop you here because okay. I mean, we know Jordan. We know what Jordan is all about. It's a client regime, and even the client regime theory is has a spectrum. And I think Jordan is at the lowest spectrum of the client regime. They really don't have any political choices whatsoever. So he is caught in the situation you are saying in the White House, Donald Trump telling him, "We give you a lot of money. Oh, you don't threat. We are not threatening that we are going to withhold the money. We give you a lot of money. We are going to, take a part of Jordan, part of Egypt, put the Palestinians in there." Complete and utter Donald Trump nonsense. You know, Abdullah is taken by total surprise. He's extremely nervous. You could tell on his facial expressions. But he says, and that's really the point that matters, and that's what is being exploited by the media, Arab media in particular, pan Arab media with agendas, let's be honest, that when he says, yeah, we do plan to take 2,000 Palestinian children, injured cancer patients, and the rest, but it was said within the context that allowed Israeli and some American media and Trump himself to drive the point that we are taking the first step. Jordan has given us an initial nod. Robert, do you think that that was an initial nod that indeed Jordan is willing to play along with whatever plan that Trump has?
I think the Jordanians, along with the Egyptians, the Saudis, and other Arab regimes, in this case, are intimidated. They feel threatened by Trump's comments. Trump's talking about a possible invasion of Gaza. He doesn't call it an invasion, but what he's proposing would necessitate an invasion of Gaza. And this is something evidently huge. And he hasn't mobilized his military to do this. we've seen no clear plans or anything that he's going to implement an invasion, let alone an ethnic cleansing, which is something else of its own. Now, the proposal to the Arab regimes is you're going to take these people, some 2 million people from Gaza, after we commit this atrocity, essentially, by not only invading, but ethnically cleansing the population and mass murdering many of them as well. That would be what this entails. For them, they understand that if they do absorb, in the case of Jordan, let's say, a few 100,000 Palestinians from Gaza, this could completely destabilize the regime. So King Abdullah, when he's hearing this, he thinks about his own political survival. But at the same time, Trump has that massive card and a lot of leverage over Jordan with the aid provided to Jordan. And like you mentioned, his regime is a client regime. It's based there. The US intelligence are there. The British intelligence are there. You can't take a step within Amman without being monitored if you're anyone political or anyone of some level of importance there. So for him, when he sits down with Donald Trump, in my opinion, he's hearing all of this as a threat, but it's also a negotiating tactic. So he doesn't want to say anything. This, in my opinion, his gesture of taking in 2,000 Palestinian children who are suffering from cancer, obviously, we haven't seen something exactly on the scale before by Jordan, but Jordan has taken in some Palestinians before with ailments from the previous wars. So I don't believe this is connected to him giving in to Donald Trump. I think what this is, and what we're seeing is, the Arab leaders right now are coming together. And funnily enough, Trump's insane comments have brought the Arab leaders together because they're freaking out to put together a plan. And they know that if phase 2 of this ceasefire deal does not go ahead, if it does not work, then we're heading to more chaos. Donald Trump knows that as well. And I think that Donald Trump, when we're talking about him as a person, I don't think his understanding of the situation is all that great. That's my personal opinion. I think the people behind him do, like Witkoff and these others who are sitting there in the background and planning things. And so when they're looking at this, they're thinking Donald Trump has a really hardcore negotiating style. He's not like any other politician. He'll threaten crazy things. And before, under the Biden administration, none of these Arab regimes were moving. None of them were moving. They were just sitting back. And then Netanyahu's coming out during the course of the first phase of the ceasefire, and he's saying, let's delay this first phase of the ceasefire. Also, Trump, his administration, knows that Netanyahu could lose his coalition at the end of the first phase. He's got extremists, not just Smotrich, and obviously Ben Gvir already left his position as a minister, but people within the Likud party as well, which are sort of scared of the second phase of ending the war, what that means, the admission that it is. So Trump's rhetoric is helping Netanyahu keep his political coalition together.
But for how long? I mean, it's like everybody is just trying to buy time. You know that you can't go back to the war. You know that. I mean, the new chief of staff, Romana, there was a story the Palestine Chronicle reported on. This is it's going to take the Israeli army about 10 years to rebuild. It's
Literally.
October 6, 2023 strength, right? 10 years if they stop now. So if you're going to go back to war, and you're going to expand the war, this is going to become 12 years, 15 years, 20 years. I mean, this is the end of the Israeli army. So we
Yeah.
know that there's no way Israel can. So this is all about buying time, Romana.
I think that this is a point that is constantly neglected. The fact that there was a military defeat on the Israeli front, because I don't think there was willingness on Israeli side to stop the war, at least not on Netanyahu's side to stop the war. He knew too well that he would lose his coalition and his political crisis would be enhanced by the end of the war, especially that Israeli commentators are now openly speaking about a total surrender and the survival of Hamas and so forth and so on. So what I think it's that, of course, there was US pressure for several reasons that I'm sure we will analyze. But I think here, what we're not talking about is the military defeat, the fact that the Israeli army could not sustain the war and could no longer sustain the war. Like even the new Israeli chief of staff, I don't think it was a random statement when he said that they're supporting 6,000 bereaved families. For the first time, they admitted that the numbers
We
of
have a number.
losses
We have a number.
was
Yeah, yeah.
so high. Like they were speaking about less
And by
than
the way, that was just in 2024. Just
just in
to, for
2024.
we,
So
between what happened October 7 until the end of the year and what happened in January, just 2024. So this is
yeah,
terrifying for them. Returning to the war is just not an option, especially that the population of southern Gaza is now back to the north. It's like pushing a reset button, but you and what army? I mean, that's the question. But Robert raised the point, and it's a very good point, that Trump might not be. I'm pretty sure that he doesn't know what he's talking about. He really doesn't know the history of the Middle East or the complexities and the nuance in language and all of that. But you say that those behind him maybe do. I know Jared Kushner once was bragging about reading, was it 15 books or something like this?
12.
But the fact that you count the books that you read also is not very indicative of a great intellectual background. I'm just wondering, you know, if they actually know about the history of the Nakba in particular. 750,000 to about 800,000, according to Walid Khalidi, that have been ethnically cleansed from their historic homeland in 1947, 1948, culminating in the Nakba, the catastrophe of 76 years ago. Many of them were internally displaced. My family, a refugee family from Gaza, I think your wife as well, Robert, refugees from Jabalia, majority of them actually ended up within Palestine itself, within the boundaries of historic Palestine, but they were internally displaced in the West Bank and Gaza, what we call, and Jerusalem, what we call the occupied territories. But also, many of them went to Jordan, to Egypt, to Iraq, to Lebanon, especially Lebanon, and many other parts of the world. Yet, the degree of destabilization that event has left not only on Palestinian history, but on the history of the entire region. We still feel the reverberation of that event until today, and we will continue to feel it until there is finally justice to those refugees. I mean, do you think they're aware of the fact that pushing 2.2 million people just, willy nilly to the deserts in Sinai just like that, when we are fully aware of the extent of the injustice of the genocide that took place in Gaza? I mean, do they actually know what it will happen in the Middle East if that event actually does take place?
This is the problem. I mean, anyone with even a basic understanding of the situation understands that number one, no one's leaving by themselves. So you're going to have to do it by military force if you're going to do it. And that might not even work. So that might result in you just having to kill every single person because they're not going to leave their lands. Look, Gaza, Trump, he made the comment that recently that, every building in Gaza would be flattened, and he'd open the gates of hell if all of the Israeli prisoners were not released on Saturday. Of course, now, after the threats made and Netanyahu making his threats as well, we haven't seen anything materialize on that front. Again, down to Donald Trump's really insane rhetoric. But the people of Gaza have gone through hell. Everyone has lost multiple family members who's from Gaza. If you know anyone that's from Gaza, and Ramzy, you know this as well, and you have suffered yourself with this, everyone's lost not one family member, not two family members, 10, 20, 30, 40, 100, 120. Everyone has lost huge amounts. They're not about to leave their land. And the impact and the scar that was inflicted on the entire Arab world and Muslim world, and those obviously who were watching it, but more so the Arab world and Arab region from the Nakba between 1947 and 1949, was something that inspired generations and generations of resistance, which shaped the views of the Arab world, and then by extension, the Muslim world and the global South movements for generations until this point. What has now been inflicted already with what Israel has done with its genocide is perhaps an even bigger wound. And it's something that will not be closed very easily. And the people, yes, there might have not been this mass popular revolt that people might have been hoping for in old Arab countries and everyone coming together to unite. I mean, even the West Bank, didn't have a mass revolt. We saw moments where they had these outbursts, but that lingers. And sometimes it takes time for that to birth liberation movements, popular struggles, but it's there. Everyone feels it. Everyone in the region feels angry. They feel devastated. They feel like their world has been turned upside down. Everyone, let alone the people of Gaza. And if you put them in those Arab countries, then what you're going to get is a recipe for revolution. And everyone who has any understanding of this gets this point. We don't know how it's going to happen. We don't know when it's going to happen. But if you do this, there is going to be a repercussion for it. And so anyone in the Trump administration who actually understands what they're talking about here will know this, and will know also that this will have a negative impact on the Israelis as well. Can the Israelis absorb a military front opening on the Jordanian border, the biggest land border with Israel? Can they take that? Is that something that they are going to be able to survive even if it opens? If it opens, does it ever close? If the Jordanian regime is it either falls or it's greatly destabilized, weapons start flowing in from Iraq, for instance, for even small militant groups which start popping up. What situation does that birth? And then what repercussions does that have on Saudi Arabia?
But that also indicates to me the lack of, I mean, there is a degree of desperation going on here on the part of the Americans and the Israelis. These are not policy, these chaotic policies are not the policies of those who are in control of the situation. And I just feel, I mean, we are all media people here. I just feel like Arab media in particular is playing a role, whether wittingly or unwittingly, that is quite negative in how they are discussing, analyzing, and dissecting the comments coming from Trump. Remember, the first time that these comments were made was around the day or time that nearly 1 million Palestinians were making their way from the south to the north. So you have this empowering moment, this triumphant moment for Palestinians, in which people were singing about the right of return, chanting, right, doing poetry, and trying to connect the past to the present. Then suddenly Trump says what he says, and that's the conversation. All Arab media, oh my gosh, is he going to do it? Is he not going to do it? No one is asking if he is to do it, how? If they tried and failed for 471 days and they couldn't do it because of the toughness of the resistance and the stubbornness of the people, why are you afraid now? Why are you giving so much credit, and as if you are saying the cards are still in the hands of America and Israel? And that worries me, the way that the media depiction of that, Romana, worries me a great deal, in the sense that it makes me feel like we are being the victory of Palestine is being stolen by the way we are processing it in the media.
And that is not a new phenomenon. Like, how many times, even at the Palestine Chronicle, we try to go beyond this dichotomy, of the Palestinian scene, either as, a terrorist by mainstream media, or as a hapless victim who does not have a political agency. If there is something that Palestinians have demonstrated throughout 16 months, is that they have complete political agency. And to this point, I want to talk about what happened when Hamas said, we will not give 3 detainees on Saturday. That created a lot of panic, even, of course, among pro-Palestine supporters, because all of them were like, oh my gosh, all hell will break loose. As if, the resistance was completely lacking tactic or strategy. Honestly, if they did that move, it is because they knew that they had some leverage at the negotiating table. And this is demonstrated by what's happening today. Honestly, but I think what has happened in the last 3 days. And this morning, mobile homes magically appeared in Gaza, and more aid was delivered, and commercial fuel was delivered. The resistance and the Palestinian leadership in Gaza, of course, I'm not talking about the leadership in Ramallah, but the Palestinian leadership in Gaza seems the most in control in this phase and in this stage, but media is not talking about it. And not only, I would say, not only the Palestinian resistance, but the whole axis of resistance. Like, this afternoon, Yemeni time, Al-Houthi gave another speech reiterating the strategy, saying if the plan is going to move forward, the Ansar Allah will take part in it. Everybody seems to have a strategy. Even Hezbollah in Lebanon, they did not act randomly. And maybe we can, expand on this later. But I really think that the axis of resistance is now in control from a tactical and strategic point of view. And it's too bad that we're not speaking about it.
Right, that's right. And I think we're not speaking about it because if you are going to address the issue of the axis of resistance, which I mean, the fact that Hezbollah, uh, had to agree to a ceasefire, because, I mean, this is not a suicide pact. The unity of the squares is not a suicide pact. You have to look at your own local dimensions, your national politics, your regional politics, and the global scene. uh, by signing the ceasefire agreement, Hezbollah still remains an important player in the unity of the squares, but they have other political priorities, or rather context, that is unique to Lebanon and doesn't apply to Gaza. The fact that Ansarullah kind of escalated at the time that Hezbollah tactically retreated, it's just all part of the game. And I think the players who kind of either stood outside or opposite to the axis of resistance or the unity of the squares maybe were hoping that what happened in Syria was going to bring this kind of paradigm shift and is going to completely shift the region back in a way that can be fully controlled by the Americans and the Israelis and the Arab lackeys or allies or client regimes. But that did not actualize, Robert. How do you read that?
Well, there's a number of things that have happened here, and I think there's 2 points to break this into. And one is the media and the way it handles it, and then the impact that has, and also the audiences which watch the content or read the content. And then there's what happened inside of Syria. And what happened inside of Syria is interesting because it wasn't a situation where the government of Bashar al-Assad fought to maintain their rule. Basically, what happened is that regime collapsed. It just collapsed in on itself overnight. And I think everyone was rather surprised on how quickly it collapsed. They knew that there was all these underlying issues, which we won't get into, but it collapsed in on itself. And now it's sort of in a impossible situation. We see Abu Muhammad al-Jolani or Ahmed al-Shara. He's now in an impossible position where he sort of wants to be a Saddam Hussein, but he can't. Maybe Saddam Hussein at the start, where the Americans helped him come into power, and he wants to assume this position, but he's got nowhere to move, and it's impossible for him to maneuver. So Syria is sort of stuck. But at the same time, people assumed that the fall of the government in Syria and replacing it with a new government, and there's been big debates around this, is going to mean Hezbollah is done and that Iran is going to collapse. Iran is most emphatically preparing for a military confrontation. Whether that will happen or not is another thing. But it's very, very clear at this point, Iran has taken it very seriously, the threats from possibly the United States and definitely Israel, that attacks are going to be carried out. And what happened with Syria is it shifted the momentum. And this comes and wraps into the media point. When we look at the media, there's two different ways I think that mistakes are made. Number one is that people are just painting this narrative of defeatism. So this is something that we see on a lot of Arab media networks and Western media networks, and from activists and analysts, where it's very, very defeatist. It's very much like, Palestinians are all victims. They're losing. There is no hope in sight. We can't do anything. And then that demotivates people because they're thinking this is a losing battle. The second is there is the element to media where they read into the Israeli statements a little bit too much and then assume that the power of groups like Hezbollah, for instance, or Ansar Allah is the power of Israel, that they have parity. And this is something even the Secretary General, the former Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, he said in his last speech, there is no parity, military parity between us. And for years and years and years, we believed, people on the outside, whether they were Zionists or they were pro-Palestinian, believed Hezbollah had this massive power, which would basically destroy Israel. That if Israel was going to hit a building in Beirut and kill 100 people, that Hezbollah could do the exact same thing. And that was going to be the equation. Everyone believed it. And they sort of believed it as well because of the propaganda and also the weakness which was emitted by Israeli analysts. So when we look at the Israelis and what they say in their media, one thing I think that we have to understand is those Israelis are ex-military, they're ex-intelligence. Many of them are still intelligence operatives. So when they have their columns and there's a loss on their side, they want to complain about it, times two. Let's complain times two about it. Because what happens is they know that Hezbollah, the Iranian media, and Mayadeen maybe, it's going to take these statements and go, look, the Israelis are weak. And what this does in their mind, I think, is lull people into a state of, oh, well, we're really strong and they're really weak now. And so there's an expectation from the Arab audience or the Muslim audience or whoever is people on the outside, if it's in English, that these forces which are opposing Israel have some sort of parity militarily, that they have the strength of Israel and the United States and can inflict sort of defeats in the way that they would, and not looking at it in the way that it is in reality, which is if you have guerrilla movements or political parties which have an armed wing attached to it, for instance, who are not near the power of the Israelis militarily existing, continuing to survive and scoring tactical victories along the way is a victory for the resistance. That is a victory for a guerrilla group. That's a victory for a resistance. But we're looking at it in a different sort of way sometimes because people are lulled into this sort of sense of we're very, very strong and, our side is strong and they're going to do better than
And of course,
expected.
there is the factor, Robert, that Israel targets civilians to put pressure on the resistance by destabilizing. I mean, they destroyed virtually all of Gaza to break that bond between the resistance and the people, and the relationship became even stronger. The resistance does not attack civilians or does not make it kind of the theme of its reactions by to attack civilians, because they know that in a right wing extremist society, the more civilians you attack, the more they become attached to the government and to Netanyahu in particular. So they are also being strategic that way. And, let's not completely dismiss the moral aspect. In one interview we conducted with Richard Falk, Professor Richard Falk here, he spoke to us about the legitimacy war and the actual war, and he says those who win the legitimacy war never historically lose the actual war. Ultimately, they will win, and that is kind of, you can take that and apply to any national liberation movement that has succeeded throughout history. Palestinians, Lebanese, Yemenis, all of them, they are aware of the legitimacy war. And this is why they try that this respond strategically, but not in a way that put them, you were talking about the military parity, but also not put them at a moral or immoral parity as that of Israel as well. But you also raised the point about Iran, and I'm going to take that and raise that question with Romana, because things are happening fast at a global stage. The telephone conversation between Putin and Trump, the fact that there's some understanding that they will be meeting soon and maybe in Saudi Arabia, which is also quite interesting choice. Uh, some in the media are saying everything that happened in Syria and all of that is just Russian concession to Trump that I will leave the Middle East if you let go of Ukraine. So there's some sort of a kind of a great game underway here, of historical proportions. Uh, do you think that that is going to happen? Do you think that the relationship between Iran and Russia remains strong? Do you think Russia can afford actually leaving the region? And just one last thing I want to say about this. Just I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, the Russians have actually agreed with Sudan to establish a military port in Sudan. So it doesn't seem like the Russians are really in any kind of mood of negotiating, departing the region. So what should we understand from all of this?
Of course, it is not easy to read the situation now because I think that as journalists, sometimes we make a mistake to read current events as if they were history. Some things have to be read in the long run and cannot be read immediately. Even the role of Russia, and not only of Russia, the role of a shifting world. This world is changing. And I do not think that October 7 itself could have happened if the world wasn't going into a different direction. Now, do we see the outcomes right now of this change? No, maybe we will see it in the long run, but I think some kind of change is indeed happening. And even the role of Russia in a potential post-war in Ukraine scenario, how would it change? Some people say, oh, for example, regarding the relationship between Israel and Russia, they say there is an unbreakable bond, basically, to take the definition from the US, between Russia and Israel, and it cannot be broken. I honestly do not think that there are unbreakable bonds in relations between countries, because history is constantly changing and shifting, and particularly in this moment where changes can happen so quickly. So we will have to see what the developments are. If Russia, and this is something that I'm saying at a personal level, if Russia wants to have a role in a new world, and it seemed very interested to have this role, at least before getting entangled in the Ukrainian situation, and wants to have a leading role in a new world, focus on the global south, it has to do something now, and it can't basically lose this chance and this opportunity.
And perhaps the same can apply to China, and which we will discuss in a dedicated episode just because of the time element. I'm going to give each one of us 30 seconds just to talk about what do you expect will happen as far as the ceasefire is concerned. I know we're not in the business of predictions, but we kind of have enough data, enough information to kind of try to gauge in some sort of a reasonable expectation for coming days and weeks. Robert.
Uh, Again, I wouldn't say anything with certainty. It looks like Hamas managed to extract concessions from the Israelis, that they're in a rather weak position for now in this particular phase. The Arab regimes are coming together and putting together proposals. I think the Arab and Muslim world are united on this, or are going to have to be united on this, to put forward an alternative proposal to the Trump administration. As that is happening, I believe we're going to see a number of developments which will lead us into phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement. I think at the moment, all this action, all the rhetoric, everything that's happening is to help all parties achieve phase 2. So I believe that that's where we're heading. We're heading into phase 2. And Israel then is going to look to pivot. It's going to look to target more so the West Bank. Obviously, it's got a military operation there. No one is talking about. It's killed around 100 people so far this year there. And then it's got the Lebanon front. We still don't know what's happening with that. There's tensions with Iran. So I think there's unsettled scores as well with Ansarullah in Yemen as well. So there is a number of fronts which could open. I don't think the war is over, but I think in Gaza, they're trying to forward the ceasefire because there's nothing there to gain. They know that they can't win in Gaza. And like we said earlier, if you don't decisively defeat a guerrilla movement, especially after what Israel has done and the power it's used over a period of 15 months, then you've lost, and the guerrilla movement wins, and that's a military victory for them. So that's
Absolutely. Thank
my
you.
prediction.
Thank you very much, Robert. Romana?
Yeah, my feeling is also that we are going to move towards the second phase. I think that every stage or of every phase will be characterized by this painful rhetoric, and it's going to be because, of course, it can't be accepted, as it is. Like Israel accepted this ceasefire. In Latin, we say obtorto collo, like against his willingness, particularly against Netanyahu's willingness. So there will be painful rhetoric at each stage. But if I had any doubt, seeing what happened today with the resolution of the ceasefire crisis of these days actually gave me confirmation of my feeling.
Right. Thank you both very, very much. I just want to raise kind of or bring our viewers' attention to the Arab politics. Rarely do Arab politics actually matter. I mean, Arab League summits are held and ends without even ordinary Arabs paying attention. This time, I think a lot of people are paying attention. I think there is a historical opportunity here for the Arabs, not necessarily come to the rescue of Palestinians. I mean, they haven't done so over the course of 15 months, but now there is some sort of a linkage between Arab national interests, collectively and individually, and what is happening in Gaza. So we have to stay hopeful and see if the discourse, there is a shift in discourse, but if that is going to be sustainable and meaningful and would indeed send a clear message to Trump and Netanyahu that no ethnic cleansing is going to happen and the Arabs are finally a political player or a political agent in all of this. Thank you both, as usual, so very much for your contributions. Keep up the good work, and we'll meet here again. That's Ramzy Baroud. Thank you very much. Bye bye.